Hello, my name is Natalie Stamper, and I will be sharing my presentation with you for the next half hour. If you have any questions, please feel free to email or text me. Thank you for joining my session, and I welcome your feedback. Greetings from Portland, Oregon, where I am located and looking out on a rainy June day today. I am delighted to virtually be with you. I work at Lewis and Clark, a small liberal arts college where I teach first and second year French. And prior to this, I worked in Seattle where I taught preschool through college, sometimes within the same day. I had quite an eclectic collection of jobs back then, which I think offers a unique perspective on teaching. So I feel like these photos are really polished, so here's a quick shot of me while I'm working on this presentation. Voila. So, as you saw in the description, this session will explore the different ideas to create connectedness in the classroom. So, my personal goal is really to increase the students' learning and motivation while decreasing their anxiety, especially right now with everything that's going on. So, I will be sharing my experiences and some tips for you. There we go. So, the can-do statements. So the takeaway is I wanted to make sure that you get a sense of connectedness and some ideas on how to expand upon that, and also to blend the language and the culture with instruction. So before we begin, I'd like you to think about how we create community in an online, an in-person, or a hybrid class. What do you do already? So would you just take about 10 seconds to reflect on how you create community in your classrooms? So we'll do 10 seconds of silence and I'll watch the time starting now. 10 seconds can sometimes feel very short or very long, depending on the situation. But I hope that during that time that you were able to think of some of the ways that you work hard to create community in your classroom, and just to think and reflect back on those as we go through this presentation. So with our swift transition to online learning this spring, I wanted to share some of the ideas that worked and that didn't work during this pandemic. If you're like me, there are a lot of real unknowns in the upcoming academic year. I know that for me, Lewis and Clark will be going back to in-person instruction, but it will be looking very different. And I'm still waiting to find out what my children will be doing when the school year begins. So we will see. Okay, so here's a list of some of the topics I'll be covering on building community and exploring cultures. So many of these things can be used in person or online, but it particularly focuses on how I transitioned to the online teaching. So here are a couple of the themes that we'll be going over today. So the first one we'll do is start talking about making connections and creating a positive online experience. So thankfully, our classroom community was already established before we went online, and I have a deep and newfound admiration for online teachers. My school used Zoom, and I initially made the rookie mistake of many rookie mistakes, but one of them was using the waiting room in Zoom. And it was just a dreadful, solitary place where the student had to wait until I admitted them into the classroom. So very quickly, I realized that my students needed that downtime before and after class to connect with one another, just as they would in person classrooms. So our classrooms are 3 days a week for 1 hour each, just so that you have an idea of where I'm coming from with how I teach and how it works for me. So sometimes I would join in during these before and after classroom times, and sometimes I wouldn't. For college students, the move to online learning required moving back home or to another space. So it was a really big transitional period for many of my students. But there were some really wonderful bonding moments that happened in this kind of space before and after class. And a couple of them that I remember, one was when there was a student and she was talking about her and her roommates were out of, basically out of toilet paper. It was really getting to be a dire situation. And right away, another student popped in and said, well, I have some. Where do you live? And effortlessly, that problem was solved just online. And then another time I walked into our Zoom call and a student from Louisiana was giving a lesson on identifying the sex of blue crabs. So it was great. And no, it wasn't in French, but it was building our community and our knowledge base. And now I can identify a female crab. Okay, so the next couple of slides I'm going to show you show one way I introduce myself and begin to learn more about my students. So my goal is to create a safe and welcoming environment like we all want to do. I want students to feel really confident and secure when sharing in the classroom. So the first thing I do is I model this. I share with my students the people and the things that are meaningful in my life. So as you can see, I grew up in Nebraska, and I talk about the French connection with my town that's named Papillon, or butterfly, and it's named after the monarch migrations that went through that area. I also talk about my hobbies and my family. So here, here's my husband and my kids and some different things we like to do, gardening and cooking and baseball, and asking questions about what they enjoy doing. Let's see, here is a poem that I like to use. It's a great poem because it's very simple, and yet it's a simple form of sharing things that you like and dislike. So I thought that was kind of nice, and it's a nice way to just kind of begin bridging that understanding and figuring out what perspective or where they're coming from, where your students are coming from. Okay, so this slide is so meaningful to me because this was the last day that we saw each other face to face. So it was Friday the 13th. And in France, many people believe that Friday the 13th actually brings luck. So they will go and buy lottery tickets and things like that. So we talked about what the students believed, if anything at all, and the power of this number. And I felt like it was really fitting that this huge online and social shift would begin on Friday the 13th. So was this going to be a positive omen or a negative or a bad luck omen, or maybe a little bit of both? I think it was mostly good. So that was good. And then while we had already spoken about the bise, la bise, the French greeting, prior to COVID, way back in the beginning part of the semester, we had to update this cultural trend with the foot check, which allows people to have some personal space amidst COVID. So before I would be talking about this and these situations, but those were totally irrelevant now. So then we had to, learn about what are the new ways that are being used in France and other parts of the country. So this video was fantastic because it showed a couple different other countries too. I think they talked about Iran and they talked about China and how people were greeting each other, not shaking hands or touching. So we watched that, and since this was our last class, I asked students to get creative and to devise other ways of greeting one another without touching hands or, allowing for some facial space. And so after a while, the foot check morphed into like a hip bump or some dance moves. There were some interesting hair flicks that happened. And it was truly amazing and I'm hopeful that some of these practices are still going on because they were very creative and very fun way of saying hello. So while offering our agenda for the day, I also tried to get creative with some of my images. So here's a photo I took of a lounging squirrel in Portland. I always started class with a clear agenda and learning objectives. And additionally, I shared my slides so that the students could kind of follow along with me. However, I kind of wanted something else that was cohesive and would acknowledge this like strange new world that we were now a part of. So I decided to do a meme of the day. So a meme du jour. So they were all COVID-19 related, but I felt it helped to kind of accept and offer some humor in our unique situation that we found ourselves in. So the following slides are some of my favorites. The pioneers of Zoom. Anytime I could include music, I also did. So we had a little Brady Bunch music song there going. This one is particularly nice. My husband does a lot of the grocery shopping, so he thought that one was pretty funny. David Bowie, yes, we had to sing some songs with that, so that was kind of fun. This little, we had to poke fun of ourselves and being in Oregon, so this was one that I thought was kind of appropriate and funny. And then a classic for for the Princess Bride aficionados. Okay, and then the very last one, I like this one too, because it was like, we are all here, and what are we doing now? Nobody really knows. It's kind of fun. So sometimes I ask them to try their hand at translating the text, and in the chat box, I would have them type out a couple, it's very short, so a little short sentence about how they would translate that. Curiously, I have yet to find some French memes about COVID-19. So if anybody has any leads, I would love to hear about them. Okay, so the next part another way of creating a positive space that I tried this year way back in September was to create a class mantra. So it took me a while to really articulate short, concise goals for our class community. But I finally resolved to go with this one. So this one is, in English, it says, be present, be brave, and be kind. So this simple mantra wove its way into our classroom throughout the semester, and it was great to be able to return to it and say, for example, remember to be present instead of put your phone away, or I'm so happy to see you showing kindness right now, or what you said took courage, and thank you for your perspective on that. So I also offered these 3 quotes and had students work together to try and unravel them in English. So the Albert Camus one that's there is real generosity towards the future lies in giving all to the present. And the next one by Churchill says, it's very famous, courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. So I thought that was very appropriate. And then the last one, be kind whenever possible, and it is always possible, from the Dalai Lama. Okay, when we transitioned to online, I reminded my students and myself to hold on to the growth set mindset, and we reviewed some good study habits together. The next thing about the interactive cultural activities using humor and personal culture. So sometimes I would interject a divinette or a riddle when I felt we needed a brain break. I found many simple ones online that made students kind of go, oh, right, or oh, way. But students unwittingly expanded their vocabulary and experienced authentic sources. So I'll have you guess this one. Who am I? I'm always in front of you, but you never see me. The future. One activity I did was working on making connections between products and places. So I introduced these products and we talked about where they were from. And then I also introduced a little known specialty from Nebraska, the runza. So we then shared specialties from our families and our regions and sometimes our countries. So going along with this, the learning about geography and then connecting the places with some attractions to see, we collectively worked on this Google Doc while on Zoom. And so this was kind of a moment for me where I was like, okay, so I have the Zoom and we're meeting. What can I do where it's an interactive piece? And so I felt this one worked out really well. It was quick, but as you can see, it was helpful to pre-type all the student names so they knew exactly where to put their information. And they could choose, they chose 2 countries that they would like to go from and go to on this, and 2 countries from the rest of the world over here. And so they went through and filled that in, and then we kind of group corrected that. We did a guided group grammar correction on the prepositions as well. So, and then there was a little, joke hidden in here, not mine, but I found it online, so I thought it was kind of humorous. Did anybody see it? J'ai couru. What is that? That's not a country. Oh, it's Iran. Literally, it's Iran, like I'm running with my legs. So there we have it. And then there was 2 other little clips I put at the bottom. It's basically 2, I just forgot his name, but he's giggling, and I'll remember his name in just a moment, but it's the most ridiculous, or it's the ridiculous. Uh-oh, here I am. I'm going there, but I don't really need to show you this right now. Anyway, so that's a really fun thing to just kind of throw in for later when students can go and visit. Anderson Cooper, there we go. Thank you for your patience. Où aimeriez-vous explorer? So we talked about where you want to travel and why. So that was fun to kind of do some virtual trips in the spring. Coming back to this idea of place and home, we also talked about places and home that students identified with. So we talked about, I shared where is your family from? So I shared 2 photos from both of my sets of family, and they're from Norway and Germany originally. My family's from the Great Plains, from Nebraska or from the city of Papillion. So if you wanted to get more specific, you could talk about that. So, and you. So returning to this, I asked where they consider home, and what place they identified with. And in the green, the question asks, where is your biological, adoptive, or chosen family from, in order to open up different identity strands that students wanted to explore. So we were able to have some courageous conversations about place and identity. And this exercise actually became very meaningful to me, and I will definitely duplicate it and use it again once I become a better facilitator of conversations about these topics. So I hope to improve upon this in the future. I also asked a little question about 23andMe or Ancestry.com, and did the results actually change your sense of belonging? And that was a couple people had, and so that was a really interesting perspective also to get. Okay, so lowering anxiety during class, and especially before assessments. So I love this picture of just this woman in the darkness just going, oh man, what are we doing? In the upheaval of packing up and moving, sometimes across the country, and sometimes back to their home country, my students' anxiety at the beginning of this was really through the roof. So one way of trying to help them during these unsettling times was kind of to acknowledge their experience, to be empathetic, and to offer some space for them to talk through their concerns and listen. So some of these strategies I've used all along, but I found I used them a little bit more online. So one of my favorite quotes there, and appropriate, I think, for what we went through this spring. So questions of the day was kind of a way for me to check in and take a quick pulse. Often it offered advice to other students, kind of indirectly. I've been, and then there's also these like continuing conversations. For example, one student said, oh, I've been baking a lot of Italian bread. I've really, mastered making Italian bread. And so other students were like, oh, can we have a recipe? And so then he shared his recipe with everyone. Other people said like, oh, I go on walks, and somebody else was like, oh, I'd like to go on a walk with you. Maybe we can go on a virtual one together. So there were some really nice moments that happened in the chat box during answering the question of the day. So the next part is yoga. So now I just want to put a disclaimer that I'm not a certified yoga teacher at all, and that this picture of the partner poses over here on the right is a little bit ridiculous. But I have done some simple individual poses with students, and I have offered some 2 or 3 simple partner poses, and this is when we were in class. So that my certified yoga teacher showed me how to do. And so these poses look more like this, and not like the acrobatic one prior. So we would usually do one pose before an assessment, and the partner poses always made people smile, and it gave kind of a quick shot of endorphins to everyone, like having to like physically move and work together to accomplish a pose. So why yoga? Because it's all about slowing down and breathing deeply and moving and stretching and calming the mind. So this spring, some students were on Zoom meetings all day. Even in our 1-hour class, I kind of found that I needed a break, and I needed to take either a brain break or sometimes a body break. So I found a great online French yoga instructor, and I tried to find something that was always beginning. It wasn't very elaborate or complicated. And this clip lasts only a minute, and it was great because it reinforced, directions and body parts, and, had authentic speech. And this one that she did was called Joyful Breath, which was really fun. And so continuing with the joyful breath theme, I often had students take 3 deep breaths. I'll have you take one with me. Ready? And I would use this prop. This prop kind of inflates and deflates, and it's very simple. And afterwards, I can always see a visible difference about the mood in the classroom. It's very peaceful. Everyone feels very peaceful after doing some deep breathing. So another strategy I use before assessments is to tell a joke. So I love jokes, and they're pretty ridiculous usually. My secret to joke telling lies in this very well used book with a little poisson d'avril tail sticking out of it. And here's a joke for you. So why did Napoleon ever move? Like, why did he never move location? Well, parce qu'il avait le bon appart. Because he had a good apartment, but Bonaparte in French, it's like his first name. Isn't that hysterical? So, Napoleon Bonaparte. There we go, last name. So, the reactions are something like that. So hand over the face or, but they smile. And that's really what's important. So that's good. Another thing I do is karaoke sometimes. So I realize that this isn't everyone's jam, but I personally like karaoke, and I was kind of impressed with its results online. So I started this as a way to kind of gently end the class on Friday and welcome in the weekend. So I started with a simple remake that most students were familiar with. At least they recognized the refrain and the melody from the song. So these boots were made for walking. And I brought along my egg shakers, and I invited students to bring along any kind of instrument or made-up instrument that they could. And I encouraged dancing during musical interludes. And you don't have to be on the camera. You just move around. So students were laughing, and they were relaxed, and everybody was unmuted at the same time, and we sang the refrain. And it was just this delightful cacophony of joy. It was chaos at its best. So students offered their favorite French song or did some personal inquiry and discovered some new music to share. And I even had a couple students play the piano or play a guitar. So that was really fun. We were just missing the campfire. Okay, so the next section that I was going to talk about was just about acknowledging what we have gone through. So the unprecedented times and the unprecedented opportunities too that came from this. So that was kind of amazing for me. So most of my students were home again, and so they had access to objects that they wouldn't have had at college. So it was kind of a great moment to do a grown-up version of show and tell. So sometimes I would divide them into the breakout rooms in Zoom, and I'd ask them to bring and talk about an object that was meaningful to them. So that was fun. And here's a little quick snapshot of two experiences that definitely would not have happened without the COVID-19 stay-at-home order. So Colin got to interview his grandpa, who is a native French Cajun speaker, and his if you click on that, it goes to his YouTube account, and he interviews his grandpa. And then Liv showed us how to make homemade dog biscuits from her newly adopted rescue dogs. So that was fun too. So chez nous, this is an image I shared with my classes that showed where everybody was now located. So there are a lot of X's on top of X's for the West Coast there. I asked them to pick 2 or 3 spots in their new environment now that they would like to talk about. So it could be like a park or a special restaurant or a meaningful place, etc. And as a homework assignment, I had them write up a brief description of the spot that they chose. So what's it called? How would you describe it to a visitor? Why is it special to you? And then what we would do is at the end of certain class periods, I would ask, well, where are we going today? And I would create a Google Earth zoom in video, and voila, the class would pop in for a visit near someone's home. And they had plenty of time to prepare for this, but it was always kind of a surprise to see where we were going to go, where we were going to end the class. So were we going to go visit the Bay Area or Bosnia and Herzegovina? Or the Kissing Camels in Colorado, as this video just showed. So it was a great way to get some virtual traveling in this spring. Another idea that I kind of worked with was the book clubs and movie nights. So we started a CI library about 2 years ago at Lewis and Clark. And before we left our office for good, I distributed many books out to my students. And they read solo or with a group. And we asked students to share the story and the hypothesis and hypothesize what was going to happen next. So it was kind of an easy, fun way for students to get more exposure to the language during our stay-at-home order. And then I offered these reading strategies, which I think are very helpful as well. And then the movie night. So I decided to jump on the student binge watching momentum, and I said, hey, let's throw in some French to the mix. So we did one on 10% or call my agent 10%. And so these are some of the activities we did afterwards about identifying the characters, and we asked about their reactions and some comprehension questions about what was happening. So these next couple slides are reflecting on the culturally responsive teachers. And these ones, I won't read through them all, but you can take a moment and pause and read through it at your own leisure. But I think these are really important to kind of keep in mind and think about as you make your lessons and think about what kind of community you're creating. And then the same with these ones too, especially in our current climate. I think being change agents is crucial to the success of all of our students. So, a culturally responsive classroom motivates students to learn. Okay, and interculturality. I'll let you focus and look at these things together. There we go, and there's some resources for you. All right, voila, we made it. Wow, 30 minutes is not a long time. So I hope that you felt you got some new ideas for your practice. So I wanted to say this is a great article if you need to be bored and brilliant. And then here's some artistic creations to inspire yourself this summer. There's mine that I tried. Thank you so much. Leave me feedback and contact me if you have any questions.